we're all gonna die. Like, eventually. We all die at some point. You know, I won't, actually. But you will. Sorry I gotta be the one to tell you, but your death is inevitable. Whether or not you believe in an afterlife, your time on this planet is limited, and maybe the worst part is it's not even all synced up. The world does not end with you, and other people can die long before you do, leaving you to await your own ending alone. Uncomfortable yet? I know I am. Death is not something our brains are quite wired to process. If you try to genuinely focus on the concept of non-existence, it makes your mind recoil, and that makes avoiding it a pretty universal motivator. Defying the void is probably the most fundamental impulse of any living thing. Most of our individual experiences vary so enormously that they won't always resonate with somebody who didn't go through life the same way. My personal story is heavily informed by having been a white, upper middle class guy who lived his earliest years sheltered and religious in suburban America, and then unexpectedly changed a surprising number of those details later on, and that's why I like Doctor Who. You might be able to sympathize and connect with my experience on an abstract level, and you statistically also like Doctor Who, and that's why you're here. But if you grew up without financial privilege or had to contend with disadvantages based on your race or gender, the themes you strongly connect with might be different than mine. But the one thing we all fundamentally connect on as the main characters of our own existence is that gnawing understanding that we have no plot armor, and that is what makes death such a simple and effective writing tool. Killing a character forces a stop to their journey and growth, but often amplifies their effect on the world, plot, and audience. It's both an ever-present threat that doesn't need to be explained and a way to carve a lesson or motivation in stone. And in spite of that power, it's still nearly impossible to kill your audience's hope that death can somehow be overcome, because again, it's our most base instinct to do so. Hell, there's an entire horror IP based around playing with this. Final Destination is about a group of people who survive a near-death experience and then are slowly killed off one by one in barbaric freak accidents. It makes us uncomfortable because it feels so unfair, and because we're still hoping there's some way out. In reality, our lives are not inherently guaranteed to have meaning or impact. Sometimes lives are lost to the cold randomness of the universe, while it's generally understood that character deaths have to mean something. But sometimes, a brave writer comes along with a brand new idea that he just thought of for the first time. What if anyone could just die at any moment? Just like real life! What if the narrative safety net of themes and payoff were removed entirely? Well, hell, you'd end up with a literary masterpiece. Something bold, subversive, unpredictable. Critics would call it fearless. Defenders would say it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. Anybody who said they don't like it could be easily dismissed as uncultured normies who can't handle realism in storytelling. The only way it could backfire is if some nobody YouTuber came along and pointed out that it's the writer's job to steer us toward moments of dramatic impact and not just take their hands off the wheel while we all suffer the emotional whiplash of their inability to write a fucking character arc. What a tragic ending that would be. By the way, if you want more videos, I've collected a whole library of bonus content over on patreon.com/doormonster, including true AMAs, several exclusive podcasts, and behind-the-scenes stuff. It's also just easier not to miss things, plus there's new stuff coming out monthly, and it's helping us pay writers and editors. If you're enjoying these videos, consider signing up. In the first season finale of Game of Thrones, Ned Stark dies, and that would be a hell of a spoiler if the show hadn't imploded so hard that it ruined any ability to appreciate the parts that used to be good. It was a pretty crazy death because Ned Stark was the main character. We watched him try to be a moral pillar in a world full of depravity and violence for the whole season. When his virtuous choices are rewarded with being manipulated and betrayed and sentenced to death, we're still expecting karma to catch up and save his life, right up until he's kneeling in front of the executioner. It does not. Ned accomplishes everything a dead guy in a movie possibly can. He sets the rest of the story in motion, he concludes his own tragic story arc, and he shows us exactly what the rules of this game are. It's honestly perfect. And then, as always, the guys who did it failed to understand why it worked in the first place, tried to do it again, and ruined everything. Oberyn Martell is introduced in season 4, and he's awesome. He's an insanely skilled fighter, he doesn't seem to be a complete monster like everybody else in this damn continent, and he's here to save our favorite character from the same fate as Ned. Everyone immediately loved this guy, and not just because he's Pedro Pascal, we didn't even know who that was yet. There's this big build up to him fighting for Tyrion's life, and then any uncertainty you have in his ability to win vanishes the second the fight begins. By every established rule of this world, we expect him to succeed. Every rule, that is, but one, that if we enjoy something too much, George will take it away. Wait, you didn't like that? You were invested in this new character, clearly designed to give you hope in a story you faithfully dedicated your time to, despite how hopeless it all feels? And now that he was brutally murdered without any resolution, you think that's unfair? Well, I got news for you, pal. Life isn't fair, and that's why the show isn't stupid. You're stupid. Even if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, you've probably been through some version of this. You're like 7 seasons deep into a hypothetical show that sure has its flaws, but you love it anyway. You tune back in to see how the only likable characters remaining are gonna fare against a long hyped up villain who just got introduced, and before you know it, they're smashing in your favorite character's skull again, and you don't want to watch the show anymore. The pure hatred Cassandra feels for this scene has seeped through the teleprompter, but fortunately, I didn't watch The Walking Dead, so let's look at a different series. Something topical enough that we can slip it into the thumbnail at peak relevance. Stranger Things felt like it had so much potential after season 1, when the villain was some Lovecraftian horror from another dimension slowly trying to seep its way into our own. We got to speculate on what it wanted and how it worked. Does it cover the entire Earth? Has it been here since the dawn of time? What do the monsters even want? And after years of waiting and watching, our questions were finally answered. Is that guy? He did it. While I will firmly defend multiple parts of the show as being awesome, we do need to talk about Bob. You can't sell a new character much better than making him literally Samwise Gamgee, but on top of being super likable, Bob seems to signal a change. He clearly has this family's best interests at heart, and it's refreshing to see them finally get some support after fending entirely for themselves. He seems to be having a positive effect on Will and Joyce, or at least starting to, and we expect them to change some as a result. We start to notice a bit of a bait and switch when Will follows Bob's advice and still gets possessed anyway.
I stood my ground. I said, go away. Just like that, he was gone. Easy peasy, right?
Landing us right back where we were before, almost like Bob isn't really having much of an impact on the story. In his final episode, Bob acts on the bravery he's preached to Will by sneaking through monster-infested hallways to shut off a security system and help everybody else escape. And we keep expecting him to die, if only because he's too sweet for this world, but he miraculously doesn't. He's nearly spotted, nearly caught, betrayed by that damn broom. Surely he's a goner now, but no, he makes it all the way to the front hall, he sees Joyce, and it's over. He did it. Aw, man. Come on! That entire sequence of him barely surviving isn't just done to create suspense in the moment, it's to make us feel more and more comfortable with the idea that he's going to survive before ripping him away from us. And then it's done in the most gut-wrenching way possible, in clear view of Joyce and everybody else who cares about him, and we get treated to this lingering shot of his dead body being devoured. And thank God that happened, because now we know the monsters are dangerous. The annoying truth is that Bob is created to die, and his death is used to manipulate you into feeling shitty. Aside from the shock value, this entire scene, and therefore Bob's inclusion in the story, ultimately lacks any significance. His influence disappears along with him, aside from the occasional nod to his existence, because Joyce and Will revert right back to their season 1 selves the second he's gone. The problem isn't even that he dies, it's that nothing comes from it. It's pretty common in horror movies to have a lovable but doomed sacrifice, so you probably even saw it coming, but Bob's death not only kills him, it negates him. The show progresses as if he never intervened in the first place. Joyce's loss plays little to no part in her relationship with Hopper later on. Most of their melodrama isn't even rooted in a hesitancy to open up again, or Joyce accepting the risk of loving someone. It's just unrelated misinformation shenanigans. This might all sound obvious to you, especially with these pretty universally disappointing examples. Just lazy writing, right? Creating a likable character with no other purpose than to be killed off seems like how to not write good 101, and so you'd think it'd be really easy to avoid. But it's bafflingly common for main characters with obvious thematic conclusions on the horizon to just self-sacrifice, as if the writers can't be bothered to think through the consequences of the story they wrote and just want to get them out of the way. Spoilers for K-pop Demon Hunters, although saying that is probably a little too much information already. Shinu is a complicated character with a messy past. He feels deep remorse for abandoning his family, and the villain of the story exploits his shame to control him. Rumi is struggling with the same thing. They specifically connect with each other over their desire to escape the aspects of themselves they're ashamed of, and they both fail to do so. Rumi follows the path of self-acceptance and redemption and embraces the parts she's ashamed of to become a more complete person. It's what the whole final song's about. Because there's a narrative momentum pointing in a redemptive direction, I was waiting for Jinyu to join in and rebel against his master, combining their voices so they can finally break free together, which they very clearly foreshadowed. It's not a complicated movie. Instead, he throws his body right in front of the hero just as the villain strikes a fatal blow. A move, of course, made famous by James Franco in Spider-Man 3, and it just doesn't feel satisfying. The self-sacrifice doesn't undo his past actions. It doesn't balance the scales. He doesn't forgive himself in any way. There's no thematic completion to that action. Despite his past shortcomings being the source of his shame, the problem the whole movie has been his relationship to the shame itself. So giving up his life at this point feels more like giving into the darkness rather than a noble act of redemption. Because death is so ubiquitous and overwhelming, self-sacrifice is an easy way to imitate a meaningful conclusion, but if it doesn't wrap up or propel the themes you've already established for your character or for your story, it can feel like a lazy way out, or at worst, emotional manipulation. Because that's what it is. The reason these deaths don't work comes down to a relationship between the writer and the audience that often gets overlooked. The audience is choosing to engage with your story, and that investment has to be met met with some understanding of their expectations, especially considering you get to establish those expectations in the first place. All stories contain an implicit promise from the author that they intend to communicate something meaningful, and to steal away that meaning at the last second isn't some magic trick or artistic subversion of expectations, it's just a betrayal. That's why Bob's death in Stranger Things hits so wrong. The narrative promise of that character is a new sense of normalcy and support for the Byers family, and they have to overcome their own reservations to accept and trust him. So to kill him just as they begin to do so is nothing but punishing their trust, and by extension, ours. It's like offering a treat to a scared dog and then kicking him right as he tries to take a bite. And if you dare to object, you're met with the same usual raising the stakes excuse. But if you have to rip away a character you've been building all season just to make things feel serious, then you've done a bad job of telling your story. There are so many ways to establish stakes. Your character should have plenty of things they fear losing aside from just their life. And even then, the threat of death is more than enough to put on some extra pressure. Almost nobody dies in The Last Airbender, but everything still feels important because the goal is to stop Fire Hitler. The obstacles are about challenging the protagonist's ability to manage that situation, regardless of whether their lives are in immediate danger. Even when Aang does almost die, that's not just a reminder of his mortality. It's about him making a decision to save his friends at the risk of losing his cheat code power, which he does, and despite nobody dying, it's still a dramatic setback that the heroes now have to adapt to in order to win. And that is what death in narrative should be used for, altering the stakes, not setting them. In a good story, stakes should be well established long before a death occurs. The very possibility of death draws a boundary around what your characters can and can't do, and the only way you're going to nullify that is if your characters do things that should kill them and come out unscathed with no explanation. Which finally brings us to the real question: when should you kill your characters? I've thought about it a lot at this point, and I'm proud to say that I've developed a comprehensive list of every narratively useful way a character can die. There are two. That's right, there are exactly 2 good reasons to ever kill off your characters, and I'm sure the comments won't immediately make me regret saying something so definitive. Reason number 1 is because death is the most fitting conclusion to that character's journey or personal theme. Reason number 2 is because their death will change the course of another character or the entire story. The secret third option is both, but I have yet to find a single satisfying fictional death that does not do at least one of these 2 things. The first one, I think, is far less common, especially on its own. Death might be the end to every life, but to be the most thematically appropriate ending to your story means your story needs to be very specific. The ending of any story is about the accomplishment, failure, or subversion of your character's goals. Generally, if they win, it's heroic. If they lose, it's tragic. And if it's subverted, it's because their original goal was actually the friends they made along the way. And if the answer to any of those scenarios is death, then you probably shouldn't be writing kids' movies, but the Iron Giant did it anyway, and it's one of the best executions of self-sacrifice I've ever seen. Spoilers, by the way, for the Iron Giant. I'm just gonna put a big spoiler screen at the beginning of this video, because I'm ruining all of these. If you haven't seen it, this is one of my few pause and go watch it first recommendations. It's easily one of the best movies. The Giant is implied to be a War of the Worlds type alien invader who descends upon small-town America during the Cold War, but he bumps his head so hard he forgets he's supposed to invade. Instead, he runs into Hogarth, a compassionate, mischievous loner kid, and the only person, real or fictional, to ever have that name. Hogarth saves the Giant's life and begins teaching him about the world and personal responsibility, things that he's still learning himself. So this big blank slate becomes a direct reflection of Hogarth's personal development.
It's bad to kill, but it's not bad to die. And souls don't die.
Towards the end, when the military finally finds the Giant, they attack and seem to have killed Hogarth. The Giant flies into a rage and nearly gives into the fear and anger he and Hogarth have been pushing back against the whole movie. But when Hogarth regains consciousness, he puts his life on the line again, this time armed with every lesson he's learned so far.
It's bad to kill. Guns kill. And you don't have to be a gun.
The villain, who's the full embodiment of that fear and anger, then launches a nuke at the town to kill the Giant, who's then left with his own choice. This is the best ending for this story, not only because there's no way for the Giant to exist here peacefully, but because all the themes we've been exploring have built to this moment. The Giant was destined to destroy this place, but was given the opportunity to learn the value of life and responsibility, and he does what nobody else has the strength or power to do. This happens at the end because it's a conclusion. If the story kept going, his death would serve the additional purpose of dramatically changing everybody's lives around him and altering the stakes. Some characters do both, like Ned Stark. but plenty of characters die early enough to just push the other characters forward, aka the Uncle Ben. Really just all comes down to timing, if you think about it. Uncle Ben himself does not thematically wrap up some detailed character arc by dying. If anything, his sacrifice is initially useless and his potential is tragically cut short. But that loss is the very thing that drives Peter Parker to become the overworked, masked vigilante we all know and love. Without Uncle Ben's death, there is literally no Spider-Man, and we actually have a modern example of this in Stranger Things. We're introduced to Nancy's friend Barb in the first couple episodes. Nancy is an archetypical main character and trying to get in with the popular kids at her high school, but her childhood friend is holding her back by insisting she be true to herself, which is very lame. It's a trope we've seen in countless high school dramas and show business stories. Nancy quickly turns her back on her friend in the name of gaining that higher status, Barb is betrayed and alone, and Nancy will ultimately have to realize and admit her mistake to earn her friend's forgiveness when they reunite in the final episode. Man, that keeps happening. This type of death really shines when it's another character's fault. Barb is only picked off because Nancy asked her to go to a party and then abandons her, so even though death isn't immediately confirmed, it's enough to completely derail Nancy's cookie-cutter life and set her on a path to becoming a badass renegade journalist instead of her mother. It also does establish how dangerous the monsters are because unlike when Bob dies, we don't really know anything about them at this point. If they are deadly, it's important to see them kill people, and once those stakes are established, we no longer need to kill off core characters just to remind everybody. They actually managed to make the Demogorgons feel equally as dangerous for the rest of the series without ever sacrificing more of the main cast, although arguably we could have done with a smaller cast. So while Barb and Bob are both introduced to eventually die, Barb is both the tragic figure cut down in her lowest point and the catalyst for Nancy's further involvement in the story, while Bob's death does not thematically conclude anything, nor does it motivate any other character to behave differently. Annoyingly, he dies at the right time in the story to fulfill both of these conditions and go down in history as one of everybody's favorite dead dads. Like when Joel dies, spoiler. There's obviously more we wanted to see from him and more that Ellie needed, but it's the story of how a young, lovable, surprisingly optimistic girl turns into a vengeful, bloodthirsty monster, and her father dying of old age after mending his relationships and raising a bunch of sheep or whatever it is old men do wasn't gonna cut it. And his death is not just a lesson for Ellie, but also the first domino to fall in a line of at least 14 named characters, about 50,000 dead soldiers, and a handful of dogs. Never make me kill another fucking dog in a game again, I swear to God. Neil. Meanwhile, from Joel's perspective, he had already regained the one thing he thought he'd never have again, and thematically, he has a better resolution than most of us could ever wish for in our own lives. Best to wrap it up with a nice pretty bow.
Please get up!
A less violent, but equally impactful example is Sarah Lynn from Bojack Horseman. Really hope you paused to read the spoiler list earlier. On top of being the expected ending to the horrible life of a child star, and the consequence of many of her own choices, Sarah Lynn's death and the tragic events that led to it are almost entirely Bojack's fault. It's a huge turning point for the series, and she functions as the embodiment of his failures and haunts him until the very end. It's anything but random or meaningless or disappointing, and yet nobody would describe it as unrealistic. The death, not the show. That has horse guys. Most character deaths are going to be unsatisfying in a sense because death leaves things unresolved. We'll never see the Iron Giant live in peace, or Barb and Nancy get closure, or Joel and Ellie repair their relationship. There's no way to imitate that feeling of loss aside from just taking somebody away. But there's a trade-off. You're making a promise to people who engage with your writing. A promise that there's a point to it all. Breaking conventional narrative rules is how art thrives, but I think the functional issue is rooted in the fact that you can't keep subverting expectations forever. Killing your principal cast can only take you so far until your audience expects to see the rest of the thing through to a meaningful end. If the stakes aren't high enough, it means you don't have a good grasp on what your characters want. And if they don't want anything bad enough to be fueling your story, well, and killing somebody might work actually, but you better be ready to see that shit through to the end. Hope this was helpful for some of your own writing. It was mostly a way for me to vent about Stranger Things, but then I finished season 5 and that list got way longer, so I'll likely be back with more. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in a couple weeks, and try not to die. Or at least if you do, resolve some personal flaw in the process. Don't just pause in a doorway when there are monsters chasing you. That was the whole thing. I guess I'm in the post-credit thing now because that's all that's left. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. I mentioned earlier, but Patreon has like a bunch of exclusive video on it. I'm so unbelievably tired right now. It costs $5 a month on Patreon, unless you want to be extorted, and then it costs $7. It's the same tier, but it costs $2 more. Not kidding. I said that we were gonna have 2 videos out this month. I'm a liar. We're still trying to get bugs worked out of our writing schedule. Next month, there should be 2, and that should be the way that it works for the rest of the year. If you have any like questions or things that you'd like to know how to do, Who the fuck is that? It's my fucking mother. Please include that, because I know she'll never watch through the end to even see that happen. Mom, if you did see that, text me. Just right now. Just text me. Ask me how I'm doing. Probably having a hard day. This video was written by our new writing team, which includes Cassandra and Chris and Allison and me, and everybody's done an amazing fucking job, and our marketing team has also been awesome about posting things on the main channel about when this video is coming out and helping figure out thumbnails. Everybody is so excited to be writing these videos, and we have so many fun ones in the works with so many more ideas than I have been able to come up with on my own. And I'm very excited for you to get to see all of the new videos and also hopefully meet the new team at some point. Starting in February, we are getting back to doing Okay We're Up on Twitch. So if you don't follow us on Twitch yet and you want to tune in and get some more daily content, consider subscribing or following over on twitch.tv/DoorMonsterTV. Me and Alice will be streaming our morning show Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time starting in February. And we'd love to have you there because that's how streaming works. We need an audience.